This is a GoPro Hero 4 I picked up cheap on Tradme. It doesn't power on, has a cracked front plate, and well, let's just say things got a lot worse the deeper I looked. The listing on Tradme wasn't too bad. It's a GoPro Hero 4, it was working, then suddenly stopped working, and should be an easy fix, and I picked it up for $41. So I thought, it can't be that hard. I've seen them online, they're reasonably easy to take apart. So you can see here that when you turn it on, the Wi-Fi light comes on, the blue Wi-Fi light comes on, so there's power getting to it from the battery. So the first thing I needed to do was just take it apart. That was a little bit disconcerting. There's glue underneath the front plate, just underneath the lens. So front plate came off okay, and then the power button, or the front options button, just comes off, it just sits there. It was at that point that I had a look at it and I thought, there's a little bit of green corrosion there, that's not too bad. So I kept going. To take the screws out, there are 4 screws on the front, reasonably easy to take apart. And then I had a quick inspection of it. And the button that I'd taken off the front had a little bit of green corrosion on it. And I thought, okay, I can clean that with isopropyl alcohol, so that's not too bad. And it was sitting on the front of the camera as well, which isn't too unusual. These things are quite old now. And I thought I'd have a closer look underneath the microscope. You can see here the corrosion was sitting underneath the front button. I didn't think much of that because the front button isn't waterproof, so I would assume that some moisture would have got underneath that button at the front, and I can clean that. That's not a big deal. A little bit of isopropyl alcohol and cotton swab and a brush, and that should clean it up okay. The other components on the front of the camera weren't looking too bad, so this shouldn't be too big a deal. I just need to have a look a little bit deeper and see what was causing the power issues. So I kept going. This bit was a little more fiddly because the screws were out already. Now I just needed to take the components out of the case. And I had seen some teardown videos prior, but I didn't pay too much attention to them. The trick to taking the guts out of the camera is to start where the USB ports are, and if you can just push those out a little bit and nudge them, and then carefully you can remove the components out of the case. Be very, very careful about the ribbon cables on the end, and then it all comes out. So let's have a look under the microscope and see what else. I could see some more corrosion there already, so I needed to have a closer look. And it got a lot worse. A lot worse. And this was just on the first component board, and I was wondering what the hell I was going to do with this. So this is about when I put it down and I thought, okay, I need to just take a breath and figure out what I'm going to do next. Let's just keep going. I need to take the whole thing apart and see what the real damage is, and then I can assess everything and see what I need to do from there. So removed some more screws, have a look at more circuit boards. The camera itself and the image sensor were actually okay, so I was a bit lucky there. I needed to be a little bit careful with the image sensor, but I knew from doing a little bit of research that even if I did touch it, I could clean it before I put it back on as well. These things are really well constructed because you can take them apart and and then put them back together without too much of a problem. So let's have a look at the next circuit board and see what's here. And honestly, things just got worse the more I looked. The components are really well laid out, so it should be reasonably easy to clean. I just need to get a brush and a cotton swab in there and have a look around and see what I can do with it. But I just kept on looking just to see whether or not there was anything that was actually physically damaged apart from the corrosion that I'd need to deal with later. And really, once I knew the corrosion was there, I wasn't going to get uptight about more corrosion, because all I really needed to do with that is clean it, and then once it was cleaned, see what I had to deal with in terms of the circuitry. The main circuit board had a lot of plugs with the components and wires, and I'm assuming that's, I'm pretty sure this is the audio plug up the top there that we're looking at with red and black wires. And a lot more IC chips on the board here, just more corrosion, just a lot more corrosion. Everything's pretty tightly packed in, pretty impressive little things, these GoPros, and there's a lot of test points that I can use later on if I need to. A lot of ribbon cables that connect one board to the other, so I've got to be careful with those, and at this point I didn't really know what I was going to be dealing with when it came to the ribbon cables, so I was trying to be very careful around those, and you can see that they're partially pulled out there, so that gave me a little bit of hope that some of the power and battery problems were just because of loose ribbon cables, aside from the corrosion, which I needed to clean out as well. Okay, so let's keep going. Get all the bits and pieces out of the case. Some of the boards are a little bit fiddly, and that's mainly because the ribbon cables are holding them in, so you've got to just be careful and remove the ribbon cables. Had a little bit of a break, now we're right back into it for day 2. Ignore my messy desk. I really needed to keep going with the teardown of the GoPro because it's almost impossible to clean when it's all together like this, so I needed independent circuit boards so that I could get the isopropyl alcohol on it with the cotton buds and the brushes, which meant taking out the little ribbon cables. And you can see here this ribbon cable is held in with a little piece of black tape, and there's not always documented. I couldn't find anything about this type of thing, so just have to be really careful and pull the tape up and then lift up the little lever that holds the ribbon cable in. So I just zoomed through that because I fiddled around with it for probably a little bit too long, but when you're experienced in doing it, it wouldn't be as hard the second time around. So the board is off, and then the main chips are there, and I was having a look at it and I thought, oh, that's thermal paste. So obviously those chips get at least a little bit of heat on them, so I'm going to have to replace that when I'm putting the whole thing back together because it was dry as a bone. So now I come to remove the final board from the battery casing, and I need to remove the battery plug, and it was quite hard. It wasn't coming off easy. I read a couple of things to suggest that you need to pull it up and away from the board, and that wasn't working, so I decided just to leave it alone and come back to it a little bit later. Thought I'd better have a look at all the boards now that I'd taken most of the GoPro apart, just to see what the state of everything else was compared to what I'd seen the day before. So let's put it under the microscope and take a look. Yeah, this side of the board was a lot worse than I even thought it was going to be based on what I saw yesterday. Corrosion was everywhere on the components. That's the image sensor, and I'm going to need to clean that. I wasn't too worried about that. I'm having a look at the connectors. The connectors looked okay. Just a lot of corrosion. Then I was checking out the USB port, and there was a little piece of plastic just sticking out there. Well, I thought it was a piece of metal, but it turns out it was a piece of plastic. So I got my tweezers out and had a look at that, and it just came out. So I have no idea what that is. Hopefully, it's not important. It'll probably come back to bite me at some stage in the future when I come to put the whole thing back together. So we'll continue scanning the board, and I have to say this was the worst, and there's corrosion. It looks like actual rust there as well. So all the components look okay apart from the corrosion. There's even corrosion on some of the test points, which isn't ideal. But really, until I've cleaned everything with the isopropyl alcohol, then I'm not really going to know. I'm going to have to get into it with cotton buds and a brush. I found what I thought was a battery on the board, and I tested it later, you'll see, and it is. Looking at the HDMI and USB ports, and the actual ports themselves looked okay. That is the speaker, which is plugged into the board, and I didn't actually end up removing the plug for the speaker because it's a similar plug to the battery, and I didn't want to damage anything on the board itself. Just a lot of carnage. It's almost as if they dropped it in the sea and left it there for an hour and then took it out. I don't know if you know GoPros, but they're not made to be dropped into any type of liquid, which is why they have waterproof casings. So that's the battery connector to the main board, and the documentation says you need to pull it up and away, and just got to be careful pulling it out from the board. Why I was concerned at looking at the battery connector was because there's a power issue with the GoPro, so I wanted to check whether or not the connector itself was okay from the battery compartment, just to make sure that power was getting through. So I really needed to take this off, and you can see there I was prying at it with the tweezers and it just wasn't budging. And at this stage I thought that I was doing it incorrectly, and I didn't really want to break it, so I thought I better just pause now and go and read some documentation and then come back to it later. And I did. I went and had a look, and I thought, cool, I'll just take another little break and then come back at it. Okay, I'm over my shop, and now it's time to get cleaning. So I need to take the components one by one and just give them a look over and a clean. So I've got my cotton buds, I've got some scratches and some tweezers, and let's get prepared with isopropyl alcohol, and I pour that into a little cap and start with the cotton buds just to clean the areas. So I'm going to just speed through this, cleaning one area at a time just to see how it's going to react. So I got in there with the cotton buds. Cotton buds sometimes work most of the time, and if I couldn't get it off, I went in with a little stiff bristled brush to get a lot of the crystals off. And if that didn't work, I just scraped it off with my pliers, and then went over it again with the cotton buds just to clean it all off. I read somewhere not to be too worried about the image sensor getting dirty because you can clean it with isopropyl alcohol. So I decided to do that, and after this I gave it 2 or 3 cleans and then dried it off with a microfiber cloth just to make sure that there were no residual bits and pieces or fingerprints on the sensor itself. That worked quite well at the end. I was quite happy with the result. Okay, that's one side done. Let's tip out the dust and turn it over and see what the other side is looking like. Pretty much the same. Let's keep going. It was at this point that I was feeling quite happy with myself. The cleaning had gone particularly well. I haven't tested anything to any great extent really, but I felt pretty confident that I got most of the corrosion off the boards, enough to actually plug it all in together and put the battery in and get it testing. Little did I know. So off camera, I decided that I needed to take the battery plug off the main board of the camera. And this was the result. All of the documentation said I just needed to lift and pull, but gently, and I swear to God that's what I was doing. But as you can see, the whole plug ripped off with the socket for the plug, and it came straight off the circuit board, the main circuit board. So I thought I'd turn the camera on and just show you the monumental muck up that I had caused, and I'm just sitting there thinking, what am I going to do with this? Anyway, it is what it is. So this is the plug from the battery, and the black bit is the socket that the plug sits in on the main board. So there's not much I can do about it. I can't put the socket back together, so I'm in a tidy up mode now where I need to take the remaining pieces of the socket off the plug and then see what sort of state the plug is in to see what I've got to work with now. The plug largely looks intact, which I'm quite happy with. I just need to get the little black bits out, which is the residue of the plug. So excuse my big fat fingers. These things are minuscule. So the plug actually comes out, the residue of the plug actually comes out quite easily after I just wrestle with it for a little bit. There are actually 3 metal prongs, you can probably see them there, that the plug seats into when you push it down onto the board, and with all of the corrosion it had just eaten through the plastic and then through the metal prongs on the board as well. So what I was left with was actually a plug in quite a good state, as you can see there, but it had nothing to seat on the motherboard because that had ripped off with the plug. So I'm looking at the plug thinking, okay, this could be salvageable. And let's go and have a look what's on the main board where the socket used to be that the plug sat in. And predictably, carnage. The 3 prongs that are in there that the plug sits into are no longer there. Well, there's one there. That's the one at the top there that I'm just playing with at the moment with the tweezers. So that's still there, but the other 2 have basically come out. And the socket is totally gone, and the legs that the socket sits on have come out of the board as well. So there's pretty much nothing left of it that corroded away, which is why the plug and the socket came away together. And I don't think there was anything I could do to fix that, even if I had pulled the plug out a little more gently than I did. It just wasn't coming out. The corrosion had pretty much fused the plug and socket together. So this is what I was left with. So the next thing I needed to check after the battery plug was the ribbon cables that take data from the touch screen on the back of the GoPro to the main board. And because the ribbon cables were seated inside their sockets, I thought I would have gotten away quite nicely with those, but as you can see, the corrosion is, well, arguably a lot worse on these ribbon plugs than they are anywhere else on the board, mainly because they're so thin. And when I look at it and I think about cleaning, will the corrosion come off those ribbon cables with isopropyl alcohol to such a state that I can actually continue to use them, or are those ribbon cables just totally useless now and need to be replaced or repaired in some way? I have no idea. So this is actually what's left of the socket for the battery plug, which came off with it, and that is supposed to be sitting on what I'm calling the motherboard of the camera, but as you can see, it is no longer there, and it is all in bits, and those bits cannot be reconstituted, and I cannot put them back on the board. They are toast. Yeah, all I can do is look at the remainder of it and weep. So I'm going to have to find some other way of getting the power to the motherboard, because whilst the battery plug is still in one piece, there's no socket there, and for the life of me I can't find a replacement part anywhere on any website for that plug. So I'm either going to have to buy a new plug and socket combo, which is of the same height as this one, because they're quite low profile, or I'm going to have to jury-rig something else that allows the plug to actually connect in and provide power to the motherboard. So wish me luck. But following this, I'm going to have to check the rest of the board to see if there are any other unforeseen issues that I've got to deal with. So remember that battery I showed you a little while back? I thought we'd better revisit that and check it out, and just check it is actually battery first, and then give it a clean. So isopropyl alcohol, cotton bud and a brush, gave it a clean. There was some corrosion around it, but I don't think the battery had actually leaked itself, but I needed to test it out. So gave it a thorough clean, as clean as I could possibly get it, and then got the multimeter out just to test it. Given that this battery is soldered to the board, I didn't fancy my chances of being able to replace it, so I thought I'd better test it just to make sure it's working. So I've got my trusty little multimeter here and putting it on to voltage DC, auto detect, and I've got one probe on the battery and one on the testing points just to see what kind of voltage we're going to get out of this. So we'll put those on there, and I'm sorry about the glare on the multimeter, but I am actually getting a voltage out of this, quite a good voltage actually. So I'm going to leave it as is, and I'm quite happy with that, and we'll move on to the next thing to check. Thanks for watching part 1. In part 2 you'll see me put the battery back in, put it all back together and test. Can I get it working again?